Emily was only 2 months into her new job as a flight attendant, but already felt like she had seen it all or so. She thought every day blended into the next routine flights, long hours, tight schedules, and constant smiles. She had quickly learned the art of small talk with passengers and how to hide her exhaustion behind a polite demeanor. The airline had sent her on this long-haul flight from New York to London, a route she had flown twice already, and by now she knew the drill. But something about today felt different. The weather was clear, the sky stretching endlessly outside the window, yet there was a strange buzz in the air. As she walked down the aisles serving drinks, her mind was elsewhere, lost in thoughts of home and the endless work ahead. When she noticed him, the man sitting in first class didn't stand out at first glance. He was older, but not ancient, with silver hair that was neatly combed back. He wore a plain dark jacket over a collared shirt, simple glasses perched on his nose. His face was kind yet reserved in a way that suggested he preferred his own company. Still, something about him caught Emily's attention, not enough to approach him, but enough to make her wonder. She passed by him several times on her drink service, and as always she made small talk with the other passengers. She caught snippets of conversation, gossip about the celebrities and politicians that often flew first class. But when she reached this particular man again, she overheard something strange, a low murmur between the couple sitting beside him. She didn't catch the full words, but she did hear, "That's him, isn't it?" followed by a pause, and then Gabrielle Whitmore. Emily's ears perked up. She had heard the name before, but couldn't place it. She looked at the man once again, but he was staring down at his book now, completely engrossed in it. It was a thick novel, the kind people only read if they had a lot of time on their hands. She wasn't sure why, but she felt an odd curiosity about him. And for a moment her mind wandered back to her earlier training sessions, when they'd been warned to never judge a book by its cover. The thought made her laugh internally, and she shook her head as she walked away, still unaware of the significance of the name she had just heard. The flight was long and uneventful, the kind where the hours ticked by slowly, and the same questions were asked over and over. How much longer till we land? Is there a chance we'll get some sleep? Emily kept herself busy handing out snacks and drinks, trying to stay sharp. But she couldn't help glancing at the man in first class now and then. Something about his calmness struck her, as odd. He didn't speak to anyone except to politely ask for a drink or refill his cup with water. When she came by, he hardly looked up from his book, and if she didn't know better, she would have assumed he was just another traveller trying to pass the time. But there was something there that nagged at her. Maybe it was the quiet air of someone who knew more than they let on, or maybe it was the way the passengers around him seemed to regard him with subtle respect. Whatever it was, it made Emily feel uneasy, just a little unsettled, by how perfectly composed he appeared compared to the rest of the plane. She told herself it was nothing, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was different. As the hours wore on and the plane cut through the clouds, Emily continued her work, in a daze, half thinking about her own life and half wondering about the man in first class. Maybe it was the cabin lights reflecting off the glass, or maybe it was the faint hum of the engines, but something about the moment felt heavy, as if something was about to happen that would change everything, but she couldn't have known just how right she was. The hours seemed to stretch on, and the rhythmic hum of the plane became a constant backdrop to Emily's wandering thoughts. She walked through the aisles again, refilling drinks and making small talk with passengers, but her mind kept drifting back to the man in first class. There was something about him, something that felt both familiar and foreign at the same time. She couldn't shake the idea that he was important, she told herself. It was silly, just a feeling, a random thought, but it wouldn't leave her alone. As she passed by him again, she glanced over at his book. It was thick, with pages well worn, as if it had been read 1,000 times. She caught a glimpse of the title, The Silent World. She didn't recognize it, but something about it made her pause a moment longer than she intended. She could feel his eyes shift up toward her for a brief second, and she quickly looked away. The awkwardness of the moment made her feel uneasy, but she smiled politely and continued on her way. As she made her rounds in the back of the plane, Emily couldn't stop thinking about him. She overheard snippets of conversation from the other passengers near first class. A few of them were whispering excitedly about the author, and how he was probably flying under the radar, trying to stay out of the spotlight. They were talking about him as if they knew exactly who he was, but Emily couldn't place the name she had heard earlier, Gabriel Whitmore. The name seemed so familiar, but she couldn't remember why it made her feel like she had just missed something important. In that moment of confusion, Emily laughed to herself, thinking how silly it was. She was probably just overthinking everything. She had been on so many flights now, and passengers came and went all the time. Some were important, some were not, who cared about an author, she thought. But still it gnawed at her. Why was it that this one passenger stood out so much? She couldn't help herself. She turned back around and walked toward first class again, her curiosity getting the better of her. This time she passed him more slowly, almost as if to take in every detail. The man was still reading his book, though his eyes seemed a little tired, and his hand gripped the pages with a sense of quiet determination. She noticed a faint wrinkle at the corner of his eyes as he turned another page, and for the first time she wondered who he really was. Maybe he wasn't just some quiet traveler, but someone with a story to tell, a story that might be more interesting than anything she could ever imagine. She wasn't sure what made her do it, but she bent down slightly as she passed him, and without thinking said, "Some people just can't put their books down, even on a plane, huh?" Her voice was light, almost teasing, as she smiled at him, hoping to ease the tension that was building inside of her. It was a harmless comment, she thought, but the man didn't react at first. He just looked at her and gave a small smile that felt more distant than warm. "I suppose not," he said, his voice soft, but with a certain weight behind it. The tone didn't seem defensive or rude, but it also didn't feel friendly either. There was something about it that made Emily wonder if he was saying more than just words. Without even realizing it, she felt a flicker of embarrassment, a quiet alarm ringing inside of her, but she quickly brushed it off and turned away. As she walked back down the aisle, she couldn't help but feel something had shifted between them. She hadn't meant anything by it. Her comment had been nothing more than a passing observation, but why did it feel like she had crossed some invisible line? She couldn't explain it, but the weight of the moment lingered in her mind long after she had moved on. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was off as the hours passed by, the plane cutting through the clouds, as if time itself was moving slower than usual. She found herself walking past first class again and again, each time stealing a glance at the man who had become the center of her thoughts. She was no longer sure why, but something deep inside told her he was important. He wasn't just another passenger. He couldn't be. But why had she felt so certain earlier that he was just an ordinary traveler? The more she thought about it, the more uncomfortable she became with how dismissive she had been. His presence seemed to loom over her every step, like a shadow she couldn't escape. As she approached the galley to grab another drink, she overheard the chatter between some of the other flight attendants. They were whispering about the author again, but this time there was excitement in their voices. Emily caught a snippet of their conversation and froze. "I heard Gabriel Whitmore is on board. He's the one who wrote The Silent World." Another voice chimed in with a tone of awe. "He's worth millions and millions. He's got to be the one sitting in first class." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She turned around, but before she could ask more, the conversation quickly shifted, and they moved on to the next task. Her mind raced as she replayed the name Gabriel Whitmore again, and again. It was him, that man, the one who had been sitting quietly in first class this whole time. Emily had no idea why she didn't make the connection sooner. His name was legendary, one of the most respected authors in the world, but she hadn't recognized him not once during the entire flight. Not even when she had mocked his book. She could feel a wave of heat rising in her chest. It was embarrassment mixed with a pinch of horror. Her thoughts were spinning out of control. How could I be so careless? She had made a joke about his book, assuming he was just another tired traveller trying to kill time in a seat that he didn't deserve. She bit her lip, trying to focus her thoughts. But the guilt kept gnawing at her. What if he had hurt her? What if he had caught her mocking him? Emily felt a deep sense of unease. But she couldn't turn back now. The rest of the flight seemed like a blur. She tried to focus on her tasks. But every time she passed first class, her eyes darted toward him. And every time she saw him sitting there so calm and composed, she felt the knot in her stomach tighten. It wasn't just the awkwardness of her earlier comment. It was the fear of what might happen if he decided to confront her, or worse, if he told the airline about her rudeness. How could she explain herself to him? If she had even known who he was, she had spent the whole flight unaware of who he was. And now she realized the mistake she had made. But the worst part of it all was how little she knew about the man she had mocked. Gabriel Whitmore wasn't just some famous author. He was a man whose books had changed lives. His words had inspired millions. He was a man whose every public appearance was carefully guarded, his privacy fiercely protected. And yet she had treated him like just another anonymous face in the crowd. She could feel her pulse quickening as she walked down the aisle again, this time trying to avoid looking at him. But her gaze couldn't help itself. It was drawn to him again, his book still in his hands, his eyes still hidden behind the words. And yet she could have sworn there was something in his posture, something different this time, as if he knew she was watching him. And maybe, just maybe, he was waiting for her to realize the mistake she had made. The rest of the flight felt like a blur, each minute dragging longer than the last. Emily couldn't focus on anything. Her mind kept racing back to the realization of who Gabriel Whitmore really was. She had spent the entire flight unaware of his presence, unaware of how foolish she had sounded. Now every time she walked past him, she couldn't stop herself from glancing over, even if it was just for a second. But this time, something was different. The way he was sitting, the way his eyes were focused on the book, seemed to have changed. There was an air of quiet intensity about him, a sense of awareness that she hadn't noticed before. Emily couldn't help but wonder if he had heard her remarks, if he had caught the hint of mockery in her voice when she had commented about how people couldn't put their books down on a plane. But it wasn't just the words, it was the fact that she had failed to see him for who he was, the legendary author sitting in front of her, and she had treated him like just another stranger. The guilt weighed on her chest. She had been so careless. She had assumed too much about him, judging him based on his quiet demeanor. But now that she knew who he was, she couldn't stop herself from thinking about what would happen next. What if he decided to confront her? What if he had decided she wasn't worth his time? What if he would tell the airline about her unprofessional behavior? Would that mean the end of her career before it had even begun? She glanced at the first-class cabin again, trying to see him through the corner of her eye. But as she did, she caught a glimpse of him looking up at her. His eyes met hers for just a brief moment, and in that split second, she saw something she hadn't expected, a kind of knowing look, as if he had been aware of everything all along the way she had walked past him, the way she had spoken, the way she had tried to dismiss him as insignificant. And yet there was no anger, no sign of contempt in his gaze. Instead, there was something else, a quiet understanding. Or maybe it was indifference. Maybe he didn't care at all about the comment she had made. Maybe he was the type of person who didn't hold grudges. But the way he looked at her made Emily feel like he saw through her, like he knew the guilt that was running through her mind. And perhaps even more than that, he had seen the real reason why she was acting this way, the reason why she had been so distracted by him. She had mocked him not just because she thought he was an ordinary man, but because deep down she had wanted to push him away, keep him at a distance, because she couldn't understand why someone like him could be so calm and so composed, while she felt like everything around her was falling apart. But why had she let that insecurity slip out? Why had she let herself make that comment, when deep down she knew she had no right to judge him? Emily felt like she was walking on eggshells. Now each step felt heavier than the last, and yet she couldn't escape the feeling that somehow Gabrielle Whitmore knew exactly what was going on inside her head. As the plane continued its journey across the ocean, the tension in the cabin seemed to grow with each passing hour, and Emily found herself torn between the urge to apologize and the fear that it might be too late to fix anything. But then something happened, something unexpected. As she walked toward the galley for what felt like the 100th time, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned around and found herself face to face with a man she hadn't expected to see again. Gabrielle Whitmore stood there looking at her with the same calm expression. But this time his gaze seemed to carry something more, a quiet invitation. Or maybe it was a challenge, but Emily didn't know how to react. All she could do was stand there frozen in place, her mind racing with all the things she wished she could say. But none of the words seemed to come out. All she could do was stare back into his eyes, waiting for whatever was going to happen next. Emily stood frozen in the galley, the unexpected tap on her shoulder still echoing in her mind. Her heart raced and her thoughts tangled into 1,000 different directions. She had no idea what to say, no idea what he wanted, or why he had singled her out of all the other flight attendants. But there he was standing just a few feet away, looking at her with those calm but penetrating eyes. His presence seemed to fill the small space around them, as if he had suddenly become the center of her world. She wanted to say something to break the silence, to make some sort of excuse for her earlier behavior, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she just stood there staring at him like a deer caught in headlights. All she could do was wait for him, to speak for him, to say something that would either shatter her or give her a lifeline. Gabrielle Whitmore didn't seem in a hurry. He didn't look impatient or angry, just calm and collected, almost too calm. His gaze never wavered as he took a step closer to her, not in a threatening way, but with a quiet certainty, as if he had all the time in the world and knew exactly how this moment would unfold. When he spoke, his voice was smooth, almost like velvet, but there was something underneath it, something heavy that made Emily's breath catch. "You probably have a lot of questions," he said, his tone gentle but direct. Emily blinked a few times, still unable to find her voice. All she could do was nod awkwardly. She wanted to apologize. She wanted to say something meaningful, but the words didn't come. Instead, she just stood there feeling like a fool as the seconds stretched on like an eternity. Gabrielle smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was more like a knowing smile, as if he had already figured her out. "Don't worry, I'm not upset." He continued, his voice soft, but with an edge of something more. "I can't say I don't appreciate the irony, though." Emily's pulse quickened as his words sank in the irony. What did he mean by that? Did he know she had mocked him earlier? Had he heard her comment about his book, about how people just couldn't put books down on a plane? Her stomach twisted at the thought. But he didn't seem angry, just amused, in a way that made her feel even more uneasy. "I'm not one for confrontations," Gabrielle added with a small shrug, "but I do believe in fate, and I think there's a reason we're talking now." His words hung in the air like a riddle, and Emily felt a strange chill run down her spine. Was this some kind of test? Was he setting her up for something else? Her mind spun as she tried to make sense of it, but all she could think of was how badly she had misjudged him, how foolish she had been. The moment she had made her comment was a blur now, but it was clear to her that it had been the beginning of something she couldn't control. "I didn't mean to offend you," Emily finally managed to say, her voice shaky but sincere. She felt like an imposter standing there in front of him. But she had to say something. She had to at least try to make things right. Gabrielle raised an eyebrow, but didn't respond right away. He just looked at her with that same unreadable expression that made her feel like he could see right through her. His silence seemed to stretch on forever, and Emily felt like she was drowning in it, each second heavier than the last. She was about to speak again, to apologize more, when Gabrielle took a small step back and looked around the galley as if he was weighing his options. His eyes landed on the door that separated them from the rest of the cabin before he turned back to her and said quietly, "You don't need to apologize." The words were simple, but the way he said them made Emily feel like she was standing on the edge of something much bigger than just an apology, something that she wasn't ready for. But she couldn't look away from him, and she couldn't stop herself from wondering just how much of this moment was about to change everything. Emily stood there unsure of what to say next. Her heart pounded in her chest. The silence between them stretched long enough to make her feel like she might collapse under the weight of it. Gabriel still hadn't moved. He hadn't said anything more, and the quiet hung heavy in the air, as if he was waiting for her to make the next move. She couldn't read him, couldn't figure out what he wanted from her, and that uncertainty gnawed at her. She had apologized, but it didn't feel like enough. It never would feel like enough when it came to someone like him, the man she had unknowingly mocked without even realizing who he was. She could feel her palms starting to sweat, her mind racing, trying to come up with something to say that would somehow make this all go away. But nothing came to her. Instead, she just stood there frozen, trying to figure out what was happening, and why it felt like everything in her life had led to this one moment. When Gabriel spoke again, his voice was soft, almost soothing, but there was a steel edge beneath it that made Emily's blood run cold. "I'm not angry with you," he said, but the words felt like they carried an unspoken weight. His eyes seemed to look straight into her soul, and for a moment Emily felt like he knew her better than she knew herself, like he could see every fear, every doubt, every mistake she had ever made. But he wasn't judging her, he wasn't angry with her. He was simply watching, waiting, almost as if he were giving her the chance to figure out what she was really feeling. "I think you're underestimating yourself." He continued, his voice almost hypnotic in its calmness. "You think I'm just some quiet man sitting here on a plane, but I'm not just that." His words hit her like a slap. She blinked rapidly, unsure if she was hearing him right. Was he calling her out? Was he telling her she had underestimated him this entire time? Her mind couldn't quite catch up with his calm demeanor, but her heart was pounding harder now, trying to make sense of it. "I don't think I'm underestimating you." She finally managed to say, her voice low and uncertain. "I just didn't know who you were. I didn't realize." But Gabriel didn't respond right away. Instead, he watched her with those unreadable eyes, as if weighing her words, before giving a slight nod and speaking again. "I don't want your apology, Emily," he said her name so casually, as if he had known it all along. She felt a jolt at the sound of it. How did he know her name? How did he know anything about her? But before she could question it further, he held up a hand. "I'm not here to make you feel guilty. I'm not here to punish you for your mistake." His voice was calm but firm. There was something so unsettling about how he spoke, like he already knew everything that had happened, and everything that would happen, as if he could control the very outcome of this conversation. Emily swallowed hard, still unsure how to react. But her curiosity began to outweigh her fear. She felt an urge to ask him what he meant, what he was really after. "Then why are you talking to me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What do you want from me?" There was a long pause. Gabriel's gaze seemed to soften for the briefest of moments, as if he were deciding how much to reveal. "What I want from you is simple," he said finally. "I want you to understand that the world is not always what it seems. There's more to people than what you see on the surface." Emily's head spun at his words, his meaning still unclear to her. But one thing was certain, there was something larger happening, something far more complicated than a simple mistake, something far beyond a casual conversation between a flight attendant and a famous author. She felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, not knowing whether to jump or step back. But she couldn't look away from him, couldn't stop herself from wondering what he meant, what would happen next. She wanted to know more, but the fear of what that might mean held her in place. Her breath quickened as she waited for him to say more, waiting for him to reveal whatever truth he was holding just out of reach. Gabriel's words hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to break, and Emily felt herself drowning in the weight of them. She didn't know what to make of what he had just said about understanding the world. not being what it seemed. It was like he was speaking in riddles, and every word seemed to twist into another layer of mystery that only deepened her confusion. She wanted to speak, to ask him more, but something inside of her told her to wait, to let him speak first. But the silence between them grew longer, and the more it stretched, the more Emily's mind raced. She wanted to ask him what he meant by people not being what they seemed. She wanted to know what secret he was holding back, but every time she opened her mouth, the words caught in her throat. She didn't want to seem desperate. She didn't want to give away how much this conversation had already shaken her. "You're not the first one to make assumptions about me." Gabriel finally broke the silence, his voice calm and steady, as if he had anticipated her thoughts. All along the words seemed to cut through the tension like a knife, and for the first time since this conversation had begun, Emily felt like she was losing control. She had made an assumption about him. She had assumed he was just some quiet man in first class, when in reality he was so much more. And now he was standing here in front of her, revealing something so much deeper than she could have ever imagined. She could barely keep up. "I've had my fair share of people judging me without really knowing who I am." Gabriel continued, his gaze never leaving hers. His eyes were intense, but not unkind, as if he were sharing a part of himself that he rarely revealed to anyone. Emily could feel herself being drawn deeper into his words. But the more he spoke, the more she realized how little she knew about him, how little she understood about his world, about why he was even here now on this flight, sitting quietly and calmly, while she was trying to figure out how to apologize for something that seemed so insignificant in comparison. "I've lived a life people could never begin to understand," he said, his voice now carrying a weight that was impossible to ignore. And Emily felt her heart skip a beat. There was something in his tone, something in the way he said it, that made her realize he wasn't just talking about fame or fortune. He was talking about something much more profound, something personal, something that ran deeper than any surface judgment anyone could make about him. But what was it? What was he hiding? She opened her mouth to ask him. But before she could speak, Gabriel raised a hand in a gentle but firm gesture to stop her. "I'm not here to make you feel small," he said. And the way he said it made Emily feel like he wasn't just speaking to her, but to the part of her that was most vulnerable, the part that had felt so out of place and unsure of herself all these years. "I'm not here to judge you." Gabriel's voice softened, and in that moment Emily felt a strange sense of relief. It was as if the walls she had built around herself were starting to crumble, just a little bit, not enough to make her feel completely at ease, but enough to make her wonder what was really happening here. Was this just a conversation between two people on a plane? Or was it something more? Was Gabriel Whitmore really just an author? Or was he something more than that, something far more powerful, something that had the ability to change the course of her life without her even realizing it? "I came here for a reason," Gabriel said, and his words brought Emily's focus back to the present. Her heart skipped again, and she tried to steady her breathing, but she felt a tightness in her chest. Something was happening, something was shifting, and she wasn't sure she was ready for it. But she couldn't look away from him. Her entire being was fixated on what he was about to say next. And in that moment, she realized there was no turning back, no way to escape whatever was unfolding before her. "I need you to understand something," he said, leaning just a little closer. "This is bigger than you think, bigger than any mistake you think you've made down here, because I need your help." The words felt like a bomb going off inside her chest, and Emily's eyes widened as everything she had thought she knew about this moment began to unravel in front of her. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as Gabriel's words echoed in her mind. "I need your help." The weight of them hit her like a wave crashing over her body. She couldn't move, couldn't think. All she could do was stand there trying to comprehend what he had just said. "My help," she whispered, not even sure she had spoken out loud. Gabriel nodded slightly, his expression still calm. But there was a flicker in his eyes, something that made her feel like she had just stepped into a much larger story than she had ever imagined. "You're a part of something much bigger than you realize," he said, his voice low and steady, and Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "I know it's hard to believe," he added, seeing the confusion in her eyes, but there was no doubt in his tone, no hesitation. He was saying it like it was the most natural thing in the world. And yet Emily's world was spinning. Everything she thought she understood about this flight, about the man standing in front of her, was being turned upside down. "What are you talking about?" She finally managed to say, her voice shaky. She could feel the sweat on her palms as she tried to make sense of his words, but the more she thought about it, the more questions she had. "I don't know you. I don't understand what you want from me." Gabriel's gaze softened just slightly, almost like he was trying to comfort her. Without saying a word, he took a step closer, and for the first time Emily didn't feel the usual rush of panic. She felt as though somehow he was telling her the truth, even if she couldn't yet grasp it. "I didn't expect you to," he said quietly, "but I'm not asking for you to understand all at once." His eyes never left hers, and Emily felt like he could see into her very soul. He wasn't just speaking to her, he was speaking to the part of her that had always wondered if there was something more out there, something bigger, something beyond the small life she had built for herself. "I've been watching you," Gabriel continued, and Emily froze. The words landed with a force that took her breath away. "Not in the way you think," he quickly added, but it didn't matter, because Emily already felt a wave of unease wash over her. How had he been watching her? What did that even mean? But before she could voice her concerns, he continued. "I know your story," he said, and Emily's heart skipped a beat. "I know the struggles you've faced, the way you've tried to prove yourself to everyone around you, the way you've pushed yourself to the limit to make sure no one ever sees the real you." His voice held no judgment, just an undeniable certainty. And Emily felt as though her walls had crumbled entirely. Her breath caught in her throat. "How do you know that?" She breathed, the words barely escaping her lips. She wasn't sure if she was terrified or amazed. "It's not about knowing everything about you," Gabriel said softly. "It's about seeing you for who you are." Emily felt herself on the edge of a precipice. She wasn't sure if she was ready to jump, but at the same time, she felt an unshakable pull toward the unknown. It was as though the universe was offering her something more than she could have ever imagined. "I'm here because I need someone who can help me navigate a very dangerous situation." Gabriel said, his voice turning serious, all the warmth from before gone. "There are people who would do anything to stop me, and they won't hesitate to use anyone in their way." Emily's pulse quickened as the gravity of his words sank in. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. "What dangerous situation?" Gabriel's eyes darkened for a split second, but it was enough to make her stomach churn and her pulse race. "There's more at play here than you can understand right now," he said. "I didn't expect you to be involved, but you're here, and that changes everything." He paused, letting the silence settle in, before leaning in just a little closer, his next words heavy with meaning. "You're more important than you think, and whether you like it or not, you're in this now, whether you want to be or not." His words hit her like a punch to the gut, and for the first time since the flight began, Emily realized she wasn't just an innocent bystander. She was part of something far bigger than herself, something that was about to change her life forever.